Listen, sometimes you can have all the evidence, all the witnesses, all the legal backing in the world, and still lose everything because you underestimated how deep corruption can run. This is a story of how I built the perfect revenge against someone who betrayed me, watched it succeed beautifully for months, then had it all fall apart because I forgot that justice and the law aren't always the same thing. My name is Lysander Cross, and this is about the most devastating lesson I ever learned about power, money, and how little either of those things care about what's right. Nexus Analytics started as an equal partnership between me and Caspian Blackwood 5 years ago. I handled the technical architecture, complex data analysis that helped corporations optimize their operations. Caspian managed business development, client relations, and the charm that turned my innovations into 7-figure contracts. We were perfect partners until the Vanguard Industries deal taught me that Caspian had been playing a completely different game than I thought. Vanguard was a manufacturing giant looking to revolutionize their supply chain through predictive analytics. It was exactly the kind of challenge I lived for: massive data sets, complex variables, the opportunity to create solutions that didn't exist anywhere else in the industry. I spent 8 months developing algorithms that could predict equipment failures, optimize inventory levels, and identify efficiency bottlenecks across Vanguard's entire operation. The breakthrough came when I realized their problem wasn't just data analysis. It was data integration across systems that had never been designed to communicate with each other. The solution I created was genuinely revolutionary. Instead of replacing Vanguard's existing systems, I built a meta layer that could extract insights from disparate data sources and present them in unified dashboards that executives could actually understand and act on. When Vanguard CEO saw the pilot program results, his response was immediate. This isn't just software. This is competitive advantage worth millions. The final contract was $500,000 for implementation, plus ongoing licensing fees that could double that amount over 3 years. It was the biggest deal in our company's history, large enough to secure our financial future and establish us as leaders in our field. I was expecting our standard 50-50 split of all revenue. What I got instead was a conversation that revealed how completely I'd been manipulated. Lysander, we need to talk about the Vanguard compensation structure, Caspian said during what I thought would be a celebration dinner. The client relationship aspect of this deal required significantly more business development than our usual projects. What do you mean? I mean the relationship management, the executive presentations, the contract negotiations. The technical work was important, but the business development was what actually closed the deal. I stared at him, trying to understand where this conversation was going. Our partnership agreement covers standard consulting projects, he continued. But this was more of a strategic business development initiative that happened to include technical components. Caspian, I created the entire solution. 8 months of algorithm development, system architecture, custom integration work. The technical components weren't incidental. They were the entire product we sold. Of course your technical work was crucial, he said with practiced sincerity. But Vanguard bought the solution because of the business relationships and strategic positioning I provided. The technology was just a delivery mechanism. What are you saying exactly? I'm saying this deal falls under business development rather than technical consulting, which means compensation follows a different structure, 90-10 instead of 50-50, reflecting the different value contributions. 90-10. He was claiming $450,000 of the $500,000 contract, leaving me with $50,000 for work that represented the core innovation Vanguard had actually purchased. That's not how our partnership works, I said quietly. It's how this specific deal works, he replied. I'm not trying to change our general agreement, but exceptional projects require appropriate recognition of who provided the exceptional value. The conversation continued for 2 hours, with Caspian explaining why my technical contributions, while valuable, were less significant than his relationship management and strategic vision. According to his logic, anyone could have developed the algorithms once he'd identified the business opportunity and structured the client relationship. I left that dinner understanding that my partner of 5 years had been systematically repositioning our collaboration in preparation for this moment. Every client interaction, every project discussion, every strategic meeting had been building toward his argument that technical work was implementation while business development was strategy. But I'm not someone who accepts stuff quietly, especially when it's disguised as business logic. Over the next month, I began investigating Caspian's version of our partnership agreement and discovered something that changed everything. I wasn't his first technical partner, and the Vanguard situation wasn't an exception to his business model. It was the entire point of his business model. Nexus Analytics was Caspian's third company. His previous two partnerships had ended with similar disputes over compensation and credit, with technical partners leaving after being systematically marginalized in favor of Caspian's business development contributions. I tracked down his former partners and heard eerily similar stories. Brilliant technical professionals who created innovative solutions, only to discover that Caspian considered their work implementation of his strategic vision. Thaddeus Morrison had developed breakthrough cybersecurity protocols that Caspian had licensed to Fortune 500 companies for millions in revenue. When Thaddeus demanded appropriate compensation, Caspian restructured their agreement to classify the work as technical services rather than intellectual property development. Serafina Vale had created machine learning algorithms that revolutionized fraud detection for financial institutions. Caspian had patented the innovations under the company name, then bought out Serafina's partnership stake for a fraction of the technology's actual value. Both of them had legal settlements that prevented them from discussing the details publicly, but they were willing to share their experiences privately with someone facing similar circumstances. Caspian's entire business model is identifying brilliant technical people, partnering with them long enough to understand their innovations, then restructuring the relationships to claim ownership of their work. Thaddeus told me during a conversation that felt like looking into my own future. How did he get away with it legally? I asked. Expensive lawyers and carefully structured agreements that give him maximum flexibility to reinterpret terms based on project specifics, Serafina explained. By the time you realize what's happening, you're already locked into contracts that favor his interpretation of value contribution. But surely you had legal recourse? We tried, Thaddeus said. But fighting someone with deeper pockets and better legal representation is expensive and time-consuming. Most people eventually settle rather than risk losing everything in extended litigation. That's when I realized I had something Thaddeus and Serafina hadn't: advance warning and time to prepare. Instead of confronting Caspian immediately, I spent the next 3 months building what I privately called the perfect case. Not just against Caspian's theft of the Vanguard revenue, but against his entire pattern of exploiting technical partners. I documented every aspect of my work on the Vanguard project: source code, development logs, client communications, technical specifications. Everything that proved the innovations were mine rather than implementations of Caspian's strategic vision. I connected with Thaddeus and Serafina to build a comprehensive record of Caspian's pattern across multiple partnerships. We shared documents, compared contracts, and identified the systematic approaches he used to marginalize technical contributions while claiming business development credit. I retained Evangeline Rodriguez, an attorney who specialized in intellectual property disputes and partnership fraud. Evangeline reviewed all our evidence and confirmed that we had grounds for both civil action against Caspian personally and potential criminal charges related to systematic partner fraud. This is one of the most well-documented cases of partnership abuse I've seen, Evangeline told me after reviewing our materials. Caspian's pattern across multiple companies shows clear intent to defraud technical partners through contract manipulation and intellectual property theft. I began secretly developing relationships with Caspian's current clients, not to poach them immediately, but to ensure they understood who was actually responsible for the technical innovations they were licensing. By December, I was ready to move forward with a coordinated legal and business strategy that would not only recover my stolen compensation, but expose Caspian's fraudulent business model to the entire industry. The strategy launched in January and initially worked exactly as designed. I filed civil suits against Caspian personally and Nexus Analytics for breach of partnership agreement, intellectual property theft, and fraudulent business practices. Thaddeus and Serafina joined as co-plaintiffs, creating a class action case that demonstrated systematic fraud rather than isolated disputes. Simultaneously, I submitted criminal referrals to the State Attorney General's office for investigation of Caspian's pattern of partner fraud across multiple companies. Evangeline had connections in the prosecutor's office who were interested in white-collar crime cases with clear documentation. I also began strategic disclosure to industry publications about partnership fraud in the consulting sector, using our case as an example of systematic exploitation that damaged both individual professionals and industry integrity. While the legal cases developed, I launched my own consulting firm with Thaddeus and Serafina as partners, offering Caspian's clients superior technical services without the ethical complications of working with someone under investigation for fraud. The plan launched in January and initially worked exactly as designed. The civil suits were filed simultaneously, catching Caspian completely off guard. His initial response was predictable: claims that we were disgruntled former partners trying to extort money through frivolous litigation. But our documentation was too comprehensive for that defense to work. Caspian's lawyers quickly realized they were dealing with systematic evidence rather than emotional complaints. The criminal investigation began in February when the State Attorney General's office reviewed our evidence and determined that Caspian's pattern met criteria for prosecution under state fraud statutes. The industry coverage started in March when Tech Weekly published a detailed investigation into partnership fraud, using our case as a primary example of how business development professionals were systematically exploiting technical talent. Most satisfying, my new consulting firm landed 3 of Caspian's major clients within the first month, as companies began questioning whether they want to continue relationships with someone under investigation for fraud. By April, Caspian's business was collapsing, his legal bills were mounting, and his reputation in the industry was destroyed. Everything was proceeding exactly according to plan. Then I received a phone call that changed everything. Mr. Cross, this is Detective Cordelia Martinez with the State Attorney General's Economic Crimes Unit. I need to speak with you about the Caspian Blackwood investigation. Of course, I said. How can I help? We need to schedule a meeting to discuss some complications that have emerged regarding the criminal charges. What kind of complications? I prefer to discuss this in person. Are you available tomorrow afternoon? The meeting was in a sterile conference room that felt more like an interrogation than a victim consultation. Detective Martinez was professional but clearly uncomfortable. Mr. Cross, I have some difficult news about the Blackwood investigation, she began. We're going to be dropping the criminal charges. I don't understand. The evidence clearly shows systematic fraud across multiple partnerships. The evidence is compelling, she agreed, but we receive information that changes the legal context of the case. What information? Mr. Blackwood's attorney has provided documentation showing that his partnership agreements included specific clauses allowing for compensation restructuring based on project scope and value contribution. While these clauses weren't prominently featured in your agreements, they were technically present and legally binding. I stared at her, trying to process what I was hearing. Are you saying the theft was legal because it was documented in fine print? I'm saying that what appeared to be fraud may actually be aggressive but legal business practices protected by carefully drafted contracts. What about the pattern across multiple partnerships? The pattern supports the argument that this is Mr. Blackwood's standard business model rather than fraudulent activity. His lawyers are characterizing your case as a civil dispute over contract interpretation rather than criminal fraud. The criminal case was dropped the following week. Without criminal charges, the industry investigation lost momentum, and several publications that had been planning follow-up coverage decided the story was less compelling as a civil dispute than as criminal fraud. But I still had the civil suits, and Evangeline remained confident about our prospect in court. Losing the criminal case is disappointing, but it doesn't affect our civil claims, she told me. We still have clear documentation of contract manipulation and intellectual property theft. How strong is our position? Very strong. The evidence is comprehensive. The pattern is clear, and Caspian's contractual defenses have significant weaknesses we can exploit. The civil trial began in September, 10 months after I'd started building my perfect case. For the first 2 weeks, everything proceeded as Evangeline had predicted. Our evidence was compelling. Caspian's defenses seemed weak, and the judge appeared sympathetic to our arguments about partnership fraud. Then Caspian's legal team revealed the strategy they'd been preparing for months. Instead of defending Caspian's contract interpretation, they went on the offensive against my business practices and the credibility of my evidence. They argued that my secret relationship building with Caspian's clients constituted tortious interference with existing business relationships. They claimed that my coordination with Thaddeus and Serafina represented a conspiracy to damage Caspian's business through coordinated false allegations. Most devastating, they presented evidence that I had been planning to leave the partnership and steal clients months before the Vanguard compensation dispute, using the contract disagreement as a pretext for actions I'd already decided to take. Mr. Cross's own communications showed that he was developing relationships with Nexus clients and planning a competing business, while still bound by his partnership agreement. Caspian's attorney argued, this case isn't about partnership fraud. It's about a disgruntled partner trying to use litigation to justify theft of business relationships he was already planning to steal. The evidence they presented was technically accurate, but completely misrepresented my motivations. I had been building client relationships and planning a potential new business, but only after discovering Caspian's pattern of partner exploitation. But the timeline was ambiguous enough that Caspian's lawyers could argue I'd been planning to compete with him regardless of the Vanguard situation. Your Honor, Evangeline argued in response. Mr. Cross's business development was a defensive response to discovering systematic fraud, not a premeditated plan to harm his partner. But the evidence shows planning and coordination that predates any alleged discovery of fraudulent activity. The judge replied, "How do we distinguish between justified response and opportunistic exploitation of contract disputes?" That question became the central issue of the trial, not whether Caspian had manipulated our partnership agreement, but whether my response to that manipulation constituted business interference that negated my right to claim damages. The trial lasted 6 weeks. Thaddeus and Serafina testified about their experiences with Caspian, but their testimony was undermined by the confidential settlement agreements they'd signed, which limited what they could say publicly about their cases. I testified about my technical contributions to the Vanguard project and the systematic ways Caspian had minimized my role while claiming credit for my innovations. But Caspian's lawyers had found communications where I discussed potential business opportunities and client relationships, which they used to argue that I'd been planning to compete with him regardless of our partnership disputes. Caspian testified that our partnership had always involved flexible compensation based on project requirements, and that my technical work, while valuable, had been less crucial to client relationships than my business development and strategic guidance. Then came the moment that destroyed everything. Judge Patricia Williams looked directly at me during the final arguments and said 7 words that I'll never forget. "Mr. Cross, revenge is not a legal remedy." She continued, "While the court acknowledges that Mr. Blackwood's compensation restructuring was aggressive, the evidence clearly shows that Mr. Cross's coordinated response was motivated by vengeance rather than justice. The systematic campaign to damage Mr. Blackwood's business relationships, the coordination with former partners to maximize reputational harm, and the strategic timing of media coverage all demonstrate that this litigation was weaponized for personal retribution. The court finds that Mr. Cross's actions constitute a textbook example of litigation abuse, using the legal system not to seek justice, but to punish someone for behavior that, while ethically questionable, was contractually permissible. Therefore, the court not only denies Mr. Cross's claims for damages, but awards Mr. Blackwood $150,000 in attorney's fees and damages for malicious prosecution. I had to pay Caspian $150,000 for the privilege of proving he'd stolen $450,000 from me. The judge had acknowledged the theft while punishing me for fighting back too effectively, but it got worse. 3 months after the trial ended, I received criminal charges for conspiracy to commit business interference. The same coordination and evidence gathering that formed the foundation of my civil case against Caspian was now being used as evidence that I criminally conspired to destroy his business. Mr. Cross's actions show a clear pattern of coordinated business interference designed to destroy Mr. Blackwood's livelihood through litigation abuse and media manipulation. The prosecutor argued during my arraignment, "This case represents exactly the kind of vindictive litigation that undermines legitimate business relationships." The criminal case consumed another year of my life and another $300,000 in legal fees. I was eventually acquitted, but the trial destroyed what remained of my professional reputation and eliminated any possibility of rebuilding a successful consulting practice. Thaddeus and Serafina, facing similar charges in their home states, accepted plea bargains that included admissions of wrongdoing and agreements not pursue any future legal action against Caspian. The final irony came 2 years after my acquittal, when I learned that Caspian had used our legal battle as marketing material for his consulting business. Nexus Analytics survived coordinated attacks by disgruntled former partners who tried to destroy our business through fraudulent litigation. His website proclaimed, "Our victory in court demonstrates the integrity and legal compliance that define our business practices." He'd turned his theft of my work and his legal victory over my attempts to seek justice into proof of his own ethical business practices. Today, 5 years after the Vanguard deal that started this entire nightmare, I work as a mid-level data analyst for a regional company that pays me roughly 30% of what I was earning as a partner at Nexus Analytics. Caspian's business is thriving. He's expanded to 3 offices, hired a dozen new consultants, and is regularly featured in industry publications as an expert on partnership development and business strategy. Thaddeus works in tech support. Serafina teaches community college computer science classes. We're all professionally destroyed while the person who systematically stole from us has built a consulting empire on the reputation he gained by defeating our fraudulent legal challenges. The perfect revenge plan I'd spent months developing had worked exactly as designed, right up until the moment when Judge Williams said those 7 words that redefined justice as vengeance and made fighting back into a crime.